as Saul Cornell in the New Republic writing, this past week's string of horrific mass shootings have already triggered a predictable set of reactions from across the political spectrum, especially among Republicans, obviously. GOP leaders are typically frame the question of gun violence as an outgrowth of a personal or cultural pathologies, mental health, decline of family values, video game addiction. Again, pretty much called it there. The whole spate of possible meat shields that they go to deflect from talking about gun violence. Focusing the debate on these issues conveniently deflects attention from any government efforts to effectively regulate access to guns, which Republican politicians and conservative donor class regard as both counterproductive and contrary to the original understanding of the Second Amendment. Yes, many Republicans and gun rights advocates are convinced the Americans need greater access to guns and fewer regulations to constrain gun ownership, even in this climate, which is pretty crazy. So, this is again Saul. I'm going to be quoting heavily here from Saul Cornell in the New Republic. Democrats, meanwhile, will fall back on some sensible but sadly incremental suggestions for change. Universal background checks, red flag laws, permitting family or friends to temporarily remove guns from individuals deemed to be a danger to themselves or others, and assault weapons bans. The stalemate over gun policy, particularly in a new era of weaponized white supremacist terror, feels woefully unequal to the real and immediate challenge before us. The time has surely arrived for some bold thinking about the problem. As part of this most comprehensive reappraisal, we need to tackle head-on the most stubborn political obstacle to meaningful progress on fashioning effective gun laws, the myths attached to the Second Amendment of the Constitution. This long-embellished mythology is so powerful that before his death, retired Justice John Paul Stevens even suggested repealing or rewriting this feature on our Constitution to facilitate the process of change. Some commentators indeed interpreted Stevens' suggestion as a vindication of the fatalist view that the Second Amendment will always thwart effective reform efforts. Yeah, I mean, how can we do anything significant not run straight into America's first freedom? So, I mean, it's pretty good stuff. Shout out to John Paul Stevens, R.I.P. Let's give a shout out to JPS, baby. JPS. All right. Yeah, the actual background to the constitutional protection of the right to bear arms tells a very different story. Saul Cornell, again, of the New Republic. So his words, not mine, although they seem very interesting so far. Although Republicans and gun rights activists love to invoke the Second Amendment, few understand much about its fascinating history. Supporters of an anachronistic libertarian reading of the Second Amendment have made Thomas Jefferson the unlikely poster boy for their cause. As was true for many in the founding generation, Jefferson was certainly fond of his guns because they were actually needed to survive there, and because he needed to go hunt and all that stuff. He famously wrote that, as to the species of exercise, I advise the gun. To promote a healthy body, he recommended that your gun therefore be the constant companion of your walks. But Jefferson was not suggesting that one pack heat when heading down to the local tavern to pick up on the latest political news. Jefferson was a large landowner who lived in the western part of Virginia and owned almost 5,000 acres of largely contiguous land in the western part of his home state. Walking with a gun in a heavily forested area, 1/3 the size of Manhattan, is rather different than packing heat in the Walmart, county fair, or bar. Moreover, Jefferson understood the difference between traveling armed in a densely populated area and hiking or riding in the mountains of his home state, a distinction Jefferson himself drew out in a letter he wrote about some Turkish pistols that he owned. So I fixed one in a wooden holster to hang on the loop of the pommel of my saddle to be handily taken out and in, having used it daily. While I had a horse who would stand fire. I had other holsters also made for both to hang them at my side of my carriage for road use, excuse me, and with locks and staples to secure them from being handled by curious people. In other words, Jefferson's guns were at the ready when hunting on his lands, but he was equally adamant that the firearm needed to be firmly secured when traveling on public roads, because that is common sense. The concept of the peace has been all but lost to pretty much modern Americans, who typically think about liberty almost exclusively in negative terms. It is relatively easy to conceptualize liberty as a limit on government overreach, but it is much harder for contemporary Americans to understand the importance of the positive conceptions of liberty, including the right to enjoy the peace, enjoy life without having fear of being shot. Yeah. For example, one American law book from the era of the Second Amendment says, the term peace denotes the condition of the body politic in which no person suffers or has just cause to fear injury. The primary enforcers are conservators and conservators of the peace in both England and early America were local justices of the peace. Pretty much the idea of you are kind of calm. These individuals, typically prominent and respected men in the local community, had broad and far-reaching powers that included the ability to preemptively disarm anyone who posed a potential threat to the peace, like a police officer, some sort of person today. A type of power that reformers are now trying to revive by adopting red flag gun legislation, kind of get people out of trouble. Yeah. So, I mean, it's like the Founding Fathers, pretty much the point of this is the Founding Fathers had common sense about their guns. Obviously, they supported guns. No one's really saying in the mainstream today, take away all your guns. Just, please, can we have some common sense reform, some common sense regulation on this? 90% of Americans support background check laws for buying guns. Just the basic necessities of what we need to get done. Can we at least get that passed? Maybe that makes a dent in the problem, then we can go from there. I mean, if I could sum this article up here from Sal Cornell in The New Republic in just one sentence, the Founding Fathers had common sense when using guns, and we should too. All right, yeah, we turn back to a more scary issue about this, and this is kind of the pervasive ideology behind this, where Mehdi Hasan says, so Mehdi Hasan, writing in The Intercept today, really interesting, good stuff, and it's a tough headline. Like, after El Paso, we can no longer ignore Trump's role in inspiring mass shootings. It's not saying that he does mass shootings, but it's unquestionable, absolutely unquestionable at this point, that he has played some role behind them. He was going to lead the case here, and I'm going to add in. So this is him. On Saturday morning, a gunman at Walmart in El Paso, Texas, shot and killed at least 20 people before surrendering to the police. By all accounts, Patrick Crusius, the 21-year-old alleged shooter, is a fan of President Donald Trump and his policies. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, a Twitter account bearing the suspect's name contains liked tweets that include the Build the Wall hashtag and a photo using guns to spell out Trump. Incredibly, the nation woke up to even more grim news on Sunday, with reports that a man suited up in body armor, bearing a rifle, and obviously talking about the shooting there in Dayton. Little is known about the Dayton shooter, but a 4-page manifesto authorities believe was written by Crusius was posted shortly before the El Paso attack is full of the kind of hateful rhetoric and ideas that have flourished under Trump. The manifesto declares the imminent attack a response to the Hispanic invasion and accuses Democrats of pandering to the Hispanic voting bloc, rails against traitors, and condemns race mixing and interracial unions. So, yeah, it is, again, he also finishes up with yet another reason to send them back. Sound familiar there? The President of the United States, who condemned the El Paso attack on Twitter, repeatedly referred to an invasion of the southern border, condemned Mexican immigrants as rapists and Syrian refugees as snakes. Again, part of the same kind of dehumanization campaign the Nazis used against the Jews. Accused his critics of treason on at least 2 occasions, and told 4 elected women of color to go back to the crime-infested places from which they came. It is worth noting that Crusius, in his alleged manifesto, claims his views predate and are unrelated to Trump, but then goes on to attack fake news. So it's interesting because, again, he's as I said before, he was 16 when this came to when Trump came to power, when Trump actually began his campaign, but he will be. It's definitely his views, without a doubt. I mean, whenever he became a white nationalist, Trump and the flourishing of the white nationalist community under Trump undoubtedly, I think, played a role in his development of his views and his leading him down the rabbit hole of terrorism that we saw come to fruition this weekend. So that there could be a link between the attacker and the president should come as no surprise, but it might. Over the past 4 years, both mainstream media organizations and leading Democrats have failed to draw a clear line between Trump's racist rhetoric and steadily multiplying acts of domestic terror across the U.S. Some tried to sound the alarm, but to no avail. So Cesar Sayoc was not the first Trump supporter who allegedly tried to kill and maim those on the receiving end of Trump's dehumanizing rhetoric. Mehdi wrote in October, in the concluding lines of his column on the arrest of the so-called MAGA bomber, remember him, sadly, he won't be the last. And again, that's something that a lot of us felt, I think, at the time. I remember feeling that, like, this could be a lot worse, and there could be real attacks on people who don't agree with Trump, and especially those who he dehumanizes, and it could be worse. I do remember feeling that at the time, and look what happened here. Since the publication of that piece almost a year ago, which has listed names from more than a dozen Trump supporters accused of horrific violence, from the Quebec City mosque shooter to Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, the murder of Heather Heyer in Charlottesville, there have been more and more MAGA-inspired attacks. In January, 4 men were arrested with a plot to attack a small Muslim community in upstate New York. One of them, according to the Daily Beast, was an avid Trump supporter online, frequently calling for crooked Hillary Clinton to be arrested and urging his followers to watch out for the Democratic voter fraud screams when they cast their ballots for Trump in 2016. In March, a far-right gunman who murdered 51 Muslims in 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand, and left behind a document describing Muslim immigrants as invaders and Trump a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose. It's pretty much right there, as simple as you can get. And now this latest massacre in El Paso. Let's be clear. In an age of rising domestic terrorism cases, the majority of which are motivated by white supremacist violence, according to FBI Director Christopher Wray, Trump is nothing less than a threat to our collective security. More and more commentators now refer, for example, to the phenomenon of stochastic terrorism, originally defined by an anonymous blogger back in 2011 as the use of mass communication to incite random actors to carry out violent or terrorist acts that are statistically predictable but individually unpredictable. I mean, it does sound pretty Trumpy, and there's a lot of people in the media who also follow his lead. It's not just Donald Trump. It's the fact that so many times in the media you have, and Trump too, it kind of just sprays out from Trump in the media. I guess you can't really put Trump before the media or the media before Trump in the right-wing media, at least. Obviously not like MSNBC or CNN, but you got Fox News, you got people, especially those commentators that we just read, especially them, are out there saying things like there's an invasion going on. And that seeps through to Breitbart, and it gets through to the crazies, and this violence takes place, whether they like it or not. And that's how it goes through. Mass communications to incite random actors to carry out violent or terroristic acts that are statistically predictable, but individually unpredictable. The president might not be pulling the trigger. This is Mehdi from October. But he is enabling much of the hatred behind those acts. He's giving aid and comfort to angry white men by offering them clear targets and failing to fully denounce their violence. Exactly what is going on here with both Trump and the media. That's how that happens. He's pointing out the victims. He's saying they're doing this and keeps ramping up the rhetoric. And that, well, he may say they're invaders. He may say they're doing bad things to the country. He may say they're committing crimes. Fox News may say they're invaders. Fox News may say they're really, really bad for the country. They may cause a full replacement. Breitbart may say they're might say they're invaders. Breitbart may say they're going to take your job. Stormfront may say they're going to kill you, and they're going to kill every white man. And then that's when the prospective mass shooter is going to hear that and say, "Oh God, I have to act." And that all starts from one man. The fish is rotten from the head, or whatever the saying goes. And that is something that I think we really need to worry about in this situation. And that that source of all that hate is coming from Trump. And he's politically profiting off of it, which is more disgusting still. Yeah, I mean, you can give a speech denouncing white nationalism and violence that has produced it, declared a threat to national security, and loudly disown those who act in its name. I mean, another thing is, long term, you have to tone down their incendiary rhetoric on race, immigration, and Islam. but he has obviously done the exact opposite. In March, the wake of the Christchurch massacre, the president said he did